All right, everyone. It's 8:05 p.m. and we're going to get started on the opening ceremony for National Ocean Sciences Bowl 2020, National Ocean Sciences Bowl Finals Competition 2020. So first of all, just want to welcome everyone to our first ever virtual National Ocean Sciences Bowl Finals. I'm going to make believe I'm looking out to a crowded theater of enthusiastic students and coaches and regional coordinators like it has been every year. This is my fifth competition since becoming the president and CEO of the Consortium for Ocean Leadership back in 2016. This was our 23rd finals, and in 23 years, we've never had to deal with a situation like this. And of course, in my lifetime, I've never had to deal with a situation like this. But I think it's really great that we're doing this. Many things, as you know, have been canceled, from college basketball, men's and women's, and the baseball season, other sporting activities have all been canceled. But the National Ocean Sciences Bowl is going on. And that's really great because, as I said, every year, I get more excitement out of this competition than any Super Bowl, football game, basketball game, baseball game. The level of competition, the level of camaraderie, the level of sportsmanship is like nowhere else. And that's a credit to all of you and the leaders out there. So I thank all of you for your commitment to the National Ocean Sciences Bowl, for willing to be here, especially during this strange and difficult time, and really just be enthusiastic about being part of this. Certainly, all of our hearts and thoughts go out to many in the NOSB family who've been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic and can't be here with us for various reasons. We certainly want to keep them again in our thoughts throughout this competition and beyond. As I think about what's going on here, there's a lot of fear and uncertainty for all of us. We don't know necessarily what the future is going to look like even in a couple of days, much less weeks, months. And I know for students, for teachers, parents, everybody is wondering what the new normal might look like and when it might happen. But I think one thing to keep in mind is that whenever this unfolds, that the ocean is still going to be there. The ocean is still going to be a large part of our society and the largest part of our environment. And we need champions of the ocean for the future of our planet. And we're going to need the great minds and the great spirits and the enthusiasm from all the young men and women who participate in the National Ocean Sciences Bowl. That's what gives me hope, and I'm inspired, just like I am every year. But more so than ever, I'm inspired that I know that whatever happens in the near term, the future, I think, is still bright because of your overall commitment and your willingness to learn about the ocean and what you can do in whatever career you may go into. So thank you for that. We also have our two speakers tonight. I'll go into more detail, but if you talk about leadership in times of crisis and read about it in history, the two gentlemen that we have that are going to speak tonight they are two people that I would want to be in leadership roles in times of crisis. And so we're so lucky to have them involved in the ocean. So originally, the University of Southern Mississippi, their Gulf Coast Research Laboratories Marine Education Center, which is the home of the Hurricane Bowl, was intended to be our host. You might have envisioned some major weather event a little early for any type of hurricane, but something could cause it to be canceled or moved. Never did we think this would happen. So we aren't able to be in the Gulf Coast, but I do want to thank the University of Southern Mississippi, and especially Aaron Lamy, for the leader of the Hurricane Bowl as regional coordinator, for the work you've done to pull this off as well. We were going to have a lot of field trips planned and local volunteers doing great things, but I think we're still going to have a fabulous competition, and it's going to be a great experience for all of us. And, you know, it may be part of the future of how we do things in addition to what we do in person, but going forward, what we might be able to do in a virtual format to even include more people in our National Ocean Sciences Bowl larger effort going forward. So a lot of you were with Gulf Coast ocean science experts last night in the career mentoring event. It went extremely well. And I want to thank everyone who participated in that, all the mentors, all the students. So again, that was a great experience. Even in a virtual format, we would not be here. You would not be having regionals if it weren't for the work and for the gifts of the sponsors, the many sponsors who support the National Ocean Sciences Bowl. Chief of those is NOAA, the National Ocean Economic Administration, been a sponsor since the founding of this. And of course, we have Mr. Craig McLean from NOAA who's going to be our keynote speaker tonight. So we also have the Gulf Research Program of the National Academies of Sciences joined with us, as we are also going to be commemorating the 10th anniversary of Deepwater Horizon on Monday. And we're focusing on Gulf issues, as you will hear about more and more. And so we also have Wendy and Eric Schmidt, the Deerbrook Charitable Trust, NASA, Shell, and Lockheed Martin, America Honda Foundation, Sharon and Wayne Sternberger, the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, the Federal Bureau of Ocean Energy and Management, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, the Marine Technology Society, IEEE Oceanic Engineering Society, and McGregor. So please give them a round of applause. The sound is deafening. Thank you. So the theme this year, which was determined in partnership with the Gulf Research Program that I mentioned, is understanding human economic environmental resiliency in the Gulf of Mexico. We didn't know when we came up with that theme that human economic and environmental resiliency was going to take on a whole new scale. But I think as we look at the Gulf of Mexico and the incredible work and progress that was done to study the Gulf of Mexico in the wake of Deepwater Horizon, and a credit to the scientific community that led those efforts. So we have a never before realized understanding of the ocean sciences in the Gulf. If we can take that as just a fraction of a lesson that we might learn going forward, the importance of the investment and the commitment to science and technology, I know we can come out of this COVID situation just like we are coming out of Deepwater Horizon with a better understanding and a better future for one body of water like the Gulf and for our planet. So when I think about the issues of Deepwater Horizon, I was born in Panama City, Florida on the Gulf Coast. My earliest memories are of sitting in an inner tube with my mother about the age of 2 years old, floating in the summertime, the flat, nearly waveless conditions in the beautiful water. And that led to me having a passion for the ocean. And by the age of about 5 or 6, I knew I wanted to study the ocean and become an oceanographer, leading to my career in the Navy and even what I'm doing now. So the actual things that you think about and decisions that you make, the impact of a place like the Gulf of Mexico is huge on people, on futures. So I also worked at Stennis Space Center down the coast. I was there and leading the Navy's oceanographic community, including the world's largest operational oceanography center during the Deepwater Horizon spill or oil leakage. So I have great affinity for the Gulf, great affinity for the great scientists down there. And I just, you know, I just can't say enough great things about what the work that has been done and continues to be done on the Gulf of Mexico. So now with that, over to you. So we have 19 teams that are able to participate in this modified version of our event. How we really want to thank them for being flexible and doing the great work that they've been doing for months and months now to get ready for this. And so with that, we're going to start going through all these teams, and you know, we're going to show a slide of each one. But the important thing is every one of you needs to read the program. You need to read about these schools and the kids and the coaches that are there, the young men and women who are our competitors. Learn about somebody who's a carbohydrate connoisseur, or somebody who's a brine shrimp farmer, or somebody who would Ekman spiral out of control if it weren't for the mentorship of her brother. These type of things. Those are just but a few of the highlights. We know there are students going on to be marine biologists like Monty Graham. We know that there are ones who are going to go ahead and study pharmacy and immunology. These type of careers take on whole new meanings and importance right now. But whatever you do after leaving the Ocean Sciences Bowl, the ocean will be part of you. So with that said, we're going to run through the slides. And first up is going to be the Aloha Bowl, represented by Punahou High School. And next up is the Bay Scallop Bowl, represented by Mount Sinai High School. And the Blue Crab Bowl, represented by Catholic High School. The Blue Heron Bowl, just represented by Raleigh Charter High School. The Blue Lobster Bowl, we have a lot of blue bowls, appropriate for the ocean, is represented by Lexington High School. The Dolphin Challenge is represented by Arkansas School for Math, Science, and the Arts. The Garibaldi Bowl, represented by Canyon Crest Academy. Always love the squid hats. The Great Lakes Bowl is represented by Troy High School. The Lake Sturgeon Bowl is represented by Ladue Horton Watkins High School. The Los Angeles Surf Bowl, represented by Santa Monica High School. The Manatee Bowl, represented by Westwood Marine and Oceanographic Academy. The Nor'easter Bowl, represented by Narragansett High School. The Orca Bowl, represented by Newport High School. The Penguin Bowl, represented by Centerville High School. The Salmon Bowl, represented by Benson Polytechnic High School. The Sea Lion Bowl is represented by Doherty Valley High School. The Shore Bowl by West Windsor Plainsboro North. The Spoonbill Bowl by Gainesville 4-H. And the Trout Bowl by Fort Collins High School. So again, thank you. A round of hearty applause, virtually or otherwise, for all of these wonderful teams. I wish you all the best of luck. You won your regional competitions. I know how incredibly competitive that is as well. Again, many rounds going down to the final question, just at the buzzer. And, you know, just like any type of competition, there's a little luck. There's a lot of study, a lot of hard work, but you all are, I know, are representing so many students and so many parents and so many contributors to this. So thank you. And we know that you're going to inspire all of us over the next several days. So we're so lucky that all the regional competitions were actually held in advance of the COVID-19 outbreak. So over 1,300 students participated across the country and got to really be part of the sort of the in-person program, as well as move on. Some of them actually be able to move on to this. So as you might notice, I'm wearing in my jacket here. I decided to go with my typical type of attire for this event, where jacket and tie, an ocean themed tie, hopefully a bright one to inspire a little bit of optimism. And I have pins for many of the bowls. Again, I'm missing a few pins, so if you out there have some that you don't see on my lapels, my mailing address, you can get it at oceanleadership.org, and I would look forward to having that. So when I come visit you, I'll be wearing the right thing on my lapels. Anyway, thank you. So now about our speakers, again, both of whom I've known for many years, and both of whom I admire greatly. So first of all, it's Dr. Monty Graham from the University of Southern Mississippi. He is a renowned scientist, a renowned leader, a renowned educator, and someone who is passionate about our ocean. He's passionate about our nation and our world. And I just think, again, in this time, I can't think of a better person to be here to speak to you and to open up our National Ocean Sciences Bowl with, actually open up the opening ceremony, as it were. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Monty, and just thank you so much for being here, inspiring us, and for being a part of what I know is going to be a bright and successful future, not just for the Gulf of Mexico region, but for our nation and the world going forward. Over to you, Monty. Thanks again.
Wow, John, thank you. That was an impressive introduction, and I got to say I'm extremely pleased and proud to be here tonight. The role of ocean leadership, the Consortium for Ocean Leadership is huge for this nation, and I think I'm looking at 121 participants who are either active, current, or will be members of our consortium at some point in the future. So thank you very much for having me do this. Obviously, we wanted to have you at our beautiful University of Southern Mississippi Gulf Coast Research Lab and experience the Marine Education Center at some point during this week, but we're not able to do that. So instead you get my living room. So enjoy that, but I'm gonna actually switch it over here and share my screen and go through a few slides. Here we go. All right. So on behalf of the university, everybody welcome. We wish you were here in person. You're not, that's okay. What I'm trying to do at this point is kind of create a little bit of a circle back to the events of 10 years ago, and turn this into a little bit of a teaching moment for those of us that were embroiled in the Deepwater Horizon oil spill as scientists 10 years ago. It occupied a good portion of our lives then, and it still occupies a good portion of our lives. We learned a lot about it at the time, and we continue to learn a lot about it. 10 years ago, I gave a talk, or prepared a talk, and it was called just Deepwater Horizon Science Crisis and the Public Trust. And what I did was shortened it a little bit, brought it back out of the dusty closet, and looked it over and said, you know what, this actually applies to today. What we do as a research university and scientists and training of students is as important today under the circumstances that we're in as it was 10 years ago. And I'm going to go ahead and give you the sort of the take-home message, the moral to the story, which is you're on the path to becoming scientists. We would love for you to be ocean scientists. We would love for you to do your training at the University of Southern Mississippi. That's my plug. But do something in the sciences. You all have an affinity for the sciences. And at the time of the Deepwater Horizon, trust in science was really tested. And we want you to sort of understand that today, even under these circumstances with COVID-19, is that where you get your information, who you are trusting, has to be science-based. You are part of this growing need by our society to have a place and to provide answers, and do that through science. And so this is a call to all of you out there, is to pursue that dream. We would love for you to be ocean scientists, but do something with the talents that you have in terms of science, because it is a highly noble and trusted endeavor to do that. And we look forward to your careers in that capacity. So welcome on behalf of the University of Southern Mississippi, the School of Ocean Science and Engineering. Kudos to Aaron Lamy and his great team for pulling this off. This is a huge deal to keep this thing going. So kudos to everybody. So almost 10 years ago, today's April 17th of 2020. There's no coincidence that we were trying to do this on the 10-year anniversary of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. But 10 years ago, we were faced with an incredible challenge in the Gulf of Mexico. The one thing that we always have to come back to and remind ourselves is when the rig itself exploded, 11 lives were lost. And so everything we do from that point to now and to the future is in the context of lives lost and huge disaster ensuing. So for the course of 3 months, about 200 million gallons of oil spilled into the Gulf of Mexico. And there was it was not the paradigm that we were used to. You know, we were used to seeing oil spills occur at the surface. And this was at a magnitude and a volume of oil that no one ever imagined. It exceeded all capacity for planning. We were making up new and innovative ways to deal with this, but at the core, we were trying to deal with the oil that was coming to the surface and keep it from coming on shore. And some of these were very controversial at the time and continue to strike a chord of controversy to this day and will for some period of time. Among the most controversial was the application of dispersants. This was, and I don't know if Craig McLean will be speaking to this as well, but a lot of what we were dealing with in terms of the volume of oil was also how do we keep the oil from coming on shore. And so application of dispersants, all legal, all following the letter of the law. But it was still an oil spill of a magnitude that we were not prepared for, and using tools that were designed for something much, much lower in terms of oil volume. Still, though, you know, oil got to the shore, and we were dealing with oil arriving on the shore for many months, years. In fact, and there are still places in the northern Gulf of Mexico where you can go and dig down in sediments and find oil still there. But usually when we're dealing with oil spills, we think of how do we keep the oil from reaching shore and how do we keep our valuable coastal assets from being impacted. And so a great deal of effort was put into protecting our shorelines, and there was a very real reason for doing that at the time. But what we weren't prepared for was what was happening almost a mile below the ocean surface, where oil was erupting from the seafloor through a broken pipe at a volume that we could not control despite our engineering efforts. And so the application of dispersants at depth was taken on, and with some degree of success kept a large portion of oil from reaching the surface. But scientists are often concerned with what happens below the ocean surface. And here's a little editorial cartoon that was sort of summed it up. If the object was to keep oil from reaching the surface and therefore to keep it from reaching the shorelines, we were fairly effective at that with application of dispersants at depth. Although we didn't know what the cause or what the long-term effect of that application of dispersant, both the dispersant itself and the dispersant and the dispersed oil, as it would stay below the surface. And so enter science. And at the time in the Gulf of Mexico, this was a really unique challenge for us because none of us were really prepared for what we were getting ready to take on. And there were enormous safety and health concerns that we had to deal with, just like today with COVID-19, is that the first and foremost thing is that you have to protect yourself. And so our scientists were working offshore in some fairly harsh conditions. This is one of our own divers from at the time when I was in Alabama. And that is if anybody is a diver in the audience, you will appreciate this. Here is a a scientific diver going into the water with full dry suit and hard hat in June in the South. And you can only imagine the conditions of those divers working in that kind of heat to do science. So that was close to shore, but the other thing we got introduced very quickly was the advent of very new technologies, because we're dealing in depths that we weren't accustomed to. And so we had to use a lot of technology. Robotics came into play and played a really valuable role. And this is a particular robot out of Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute that was working in the Gulf of Mexico. This is Sentry. And you can see the smudges on the side of it from the oil as it was being recovered from its missions to go down and sample where the oil was below the surface in deep layers. But nonetheless, oil was deposited in the very deep Gulf of Mexico, and we're still dealing with what those impacts are. This is a deep water coral in the Gulf of Mexico, fairly close to the deep water horizon, the Condo Well site itself. And so even today, 10 years later, we're just now starting on some of the recovery processes that are needed and are required by law to make that recovery in the very deep Gulf of Mexico possible. A lot of science is still needed, and a lot of science is still being applied to this day, even 10 years later. So we went from an old paradigm of oil spills at the surface to a new paradigm of oil spills at depth. And like I said, you know, this required a lot of science, and it required federal scientists, state scientists, academic research scientists. It required scientists of all flavors and sort of occupations within the oceanographic and marine biological communities. And we had to talk to each other, and we had to talk to the stakeholders, the community. And so I'm going to close this out and just ask you this: who do you trust when it comes to things like Deepwater Horizon, or when it comes to things like COVID-19? Who do you trust? And there was an interesting survey that I found that came from 2008, and it identified the top 10 most admired careers. This is, now mind you, this is 2008. And I guarantee you, if you took the same poll today, that cast, it may change a little bit in their order, but that cast is still going to be there. Those are the same people that are fighting the fight today, and it involves scientists. And I beg you to follow your dreams, follow your scientific careers. Become ocean scientists if you can. There's a place for you. If you're not going to be an ocean scientist, be a scientist. Do something that is socially relevant and will have impact for the next decades. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you, John, and I will sit back and enjoy Craig's talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Monty. Great remarks. Most appreciated. And I think your plea, your guidance, your orders, if it were, from a Navy background to the students here, is that whatever field you go into, to look to be a scientist or a technologist, you know, we need you. And I think that, even as I was reading through the bios, Alex from Benson Polytechnic High School, his comment that he loves how the ocean can connect almost every science. That is so true. And that says, if you want to study anything from medicine to astronomy, oceans on other moons, ocean science can be a big part of that. So please don't forget that. And I know that your experiences here will go a long way. And again, so sorry we can't be down there with you, Monty and Aaron and the team down there in Gulfport. The facility you have is amazing. And we just need to get back down there in the not too distant future and give this another shot. And I look forward to that. And again, thank you for your leadership and inspiration throughout the Deepwater Horizon, from the day that it happened, for the 10 years since. You've been an inspirational leader to all of us, and thank you for being here tonight. So with that, we're going to shift gears and go to Craig McLean. He is the head of NOAA's Ocean and Atmospheric Research line office. It's really responsible for all the research that NOAA does. Craig has been a tremendous leader in current times. He's been very much a huge stalwart supporter of the study of climate change, and really is willing to go to all ends to ensure that the scientists and the science is done right by NOAA and even other agencies. And he's been a big supporter of scientists and science for many, many years, and I've known him for a lot of those. So Craig has an interesting background, from a scientist to a diver to a NOAA Corps officer. They wear the same uniform as the naval officers, but get to do more real oceanography work, by the way. And he's a lawyer. So if you ever heard the term sea lawyer, Craig exemplifies that. And I'll also tell you another cool thing about Craig McLean. He's a darn good rock and roll drummer. So a man of many talents, a man not of a few words, and a man who inspires me every time I listen to him. Craig, the floor, the microphone, the camera are yours. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. We may have a technical difficulty. Craig, you're...
there we are. Well, one of the things I'm not good at is, among the list of many, is the technical proficiency of telecommuting. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. John White, Admiral White, I want to thank you very much for that kind introduction. And Dr. Graham, thank you for your remarks. It brings back many memories, but it brings back also a loyalty to the memory of realizing how noble and how hard the science community worked in order to solve the problems that, as you've pointed out, are still going on today. So for our young people who are part of the bowl, congratulations to you as finalists. You're in a pretty remarkable place right now as a finalist. And to the 19 teams that are gathered remotely around the country, regrettably, we can't be together, but I think with wisdom, we chose not to be together because we're fighting something and dealing with something that's unique in our time, as was the oil spill, unique in its time, as was really every calamity that comes along. So a question I have for you, and I'd like you to consider it tonight through my remarks, and then as you go through your competition, and as you go to a choice in life and career, what you decide to do, are you going to be ready for the next challenge? Because there will be more. And will you choose to have a role in helping society meet that challenge and eventually overcome that challenge? So I'm delighted to speak to you here from my basement, and I'm surrounded by the things that I love and represent what I've done with much of my life. Perhaps you could see over my one shoulder, there's a collection of antique bottles. Each one of those came from under the water. Over on the other side, I'll not pan around, but there are different bits and parts of ships that used to be, ships used to float, they sunk, and some of their bits and pieces are now here in my basement. But the best pieces I have donated to museums, and in many cases collected those shipwreck components in absolutely proprietary means. And at least one of the shipwrecks that I've dove on is behind me there in a model, which is the Titanic. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that people might have about that. I also was very involved in the recovery of the USS Monitor, which was a partnership combination between the United States Navy and NOAA, where NOAA manages the USS Monitor, which is just off of Cape Hatteras, about 16 miles, in about 200 feet of water. And that was a fascinating series of dives and a multi-year project. So what I'd like to do is give you a brief introduction of myself and then go through some slides that we can work through. In terms of my background and where I've come from, I grew up in New Jersey, and I lived on a very polluted river. It's called the Passaic River. So shout out to Shore Bowl and the West Plainsboro High School team. You're not too far away from where I grew up. And it was a frustrating environment for me. I lived right on the river, literally. My backyard was half flooded at high tide, and I couldn't swim in that river. And to me, it was a great frustration. I think that motivated me through much of my life in the career choices that I've made. But if I can have the next slide, please. This is how I dress when I go to work every day. Maybe I don't smile as much every day. I don't always have the American flag behind me, but it's always close to my heart. But at times past, with the next slide, I could show you how I used to dress when I went to work. This is the bridge of the Garden State Parkway that goes over the Delaware River, actually. And as you can see, that's not the kind of visibility you want to really be spending your time in or enjoying yourself in. I worked industrially in diving during college years and right after college. And while I might have paid some bills with that, I learned a lot of experiences, through a lot of experiences, some measure of responsibility. And that taught me quite a bit, that carried me through other elements of my career and my life. What I found interesting about that was, through the love of my parents, I was given an opportunity to learn how to scuba dive. And it wasn't because we had wealth in order to accomplish that. I had to get a job in the boatyard next door to my house at 14 years old. I'm sure many of you are working at 14. I was jacking up boats, lifting boats, sandblasting, painting hulls, doing pretty much heavy work. And there were probably some child labor laws that we violated with the job that I had at that point in time. But it taught me, if you really want something badly, you have to work for it. And that's a value that my parents instilled in me. I hope you're feeling the same way. I would imagine you are, because you wouldn't be a finalist in the Ocean Sciences Bowl if you didn't work hard at your academics and at your science studies. But by setting your goals, setting a design, you could get to different places. Through this experience, I learned a lot about leading people, understanding people, what their fears, what their concerns might be. I have to tell you, not everybody enjoys working in an environment like this, and helping people deal with it was also a part of the job that I had. But diving in zero visibility taught me a lot about many other facets of my life that I would learn later on in my career. Here's a photograph of the NOAA ship Gordon Gunter, and I know that we're virtually meeting down in the Gulf, and I too regret that you can't see with delight the University of Southern Mississippi and the remarkable facility that is the Gulf Coast Research Laboratory, where Dr. Graham works and directs the facility. But I lived in the Gulf as well. This ship's home port is Pascagoula, Mississippi, and I was the first commanding officer of this ship. I enjoyed it immensely. We had a wonderful experience, and I've got to tell you, there's nothing as delicious as Gulf seafood. And I'm sorry we can't be down there to be enjoying it together. But being the captain of a ship is another degree of responsibility. But let me let you in on a secret. Growing up as a kid in New Jersey on a polluted river with Jacques Cousteau on television and other types of educational programming that our family would gather around the television to watch, I had as my dream and as my ambition as an 8-year-old, 10-year-old kid, I wanted to be a deckhand on a scientific research vessel. And that's where I thought my talent or my abilities or my exposure would let me arrive. Never did I dream that I would be able to be a captain of a research vessel. And additional responsibilities that I have today working in the international community, representing the United States in a number of bodies for both oceanography, meteorology, and other sciences. So never limit yourself to what your dreams or your ambitions can be, just as you might not have thought that you would be a finalist in the Ocean Sciences Bowl. So once again, congratulations. Next slide, please. If we look at the world ocean today, we can look with awe at what the ocean provides us. The air we breathe, the degree to which we use the oceans for recreation, transportation. There's a rather staggering economic number that represents what revenue we earn through and because of the ocean. But a very important one that I want you to focus on as well. Not only do we feed people from the ocean, but the ocean is a remarkable regulator of the Earth's climate. We've been focusing on what the Earth's mean atmospheric and land temperature is for quite some time, and we see it going up. What we're not focusing on enough is how that heat is being largely absorbed by the ocean, and only a small amount being absorbed by the heat. There's a tremendous amount of radiation that we're taking in and absorbing on this planet, and it's changing not just the atmosphere, not just the land, but also the ocean. Next slide, please. As important as the ocean is, we're seeing signatures of change in the Earth in these trends. We obviously know that the global Earth is getting warmer, the air temperature over the ocean, the air temperature on land, the ocean heat content, all getting warmer. Arctic sea ice and Antarctic sea ice diminishing, sea surface temperature warming, deep sea temperature warming. All of these changes constitute a changing planet at a rate far faster than all life on Earth has evolved. Think about that for a minute. We're in a period of change, of faster change than the life that we have here today on Earth has evolved within. That is a concerning trend. So is there a place for you in the study of this? Is there a place for you in determining how we're going to change this future and put our earthly course on a more stable path? For me, this is very motivating. You find young people in high school, you have your lives ahead of you. I have 2 grandchildren. I work for them because I know that we need to make decisions now that are going to give to this earth a better future than what it's on course for right now. Next slide, please. If you look across the globe at many ocean discussions and conferences and conversations at the highest levels of many governments, a number of problems and challenges have emerged. And I challenge you to meet these challenges. But how do we establish and protect the ocean through marine protected areas? How will we address climate change? The challenge of sustaining our fisheries, harvesting fish in a manner that allows the populations to rebuild, shutting down illegal fishing, marine pollutions of all kinds, including plastics, achieving what we call a sustainable blue economy, achieving an ability to utilize the ocean, keep it clean, keep the resources refreshed and replenished, but allow us to harvest food so that we could feed people and enjoy the other benefits that we get from the ocean without causing harm to the ocean. Many other subjects, including ocean acidification, corals, and for every nation that's a maritime nation, making sure that there is a competent maritime security belt surrounding that country that the citizens can rely upon. Next, please. I pause here for a moment and I took what I consider to be a rather delicate slide rather than some of the more alarming images that are in the news today. But here, there's photos by a gentleman named Eric McLean, no relation to me, but I want to give the young man credit for this photograph. And the person is wiping down the keyboard, as I'm sure others have done in your school prior to your having school shifted to your home environment. But this is the life we're living right now. And we're having to sanitize in order to protect ourselves. I would take you back into the history books and you could look at black and white photographs. As I like to refer to it, that's when the world was black and white. Black and white photographs showed a world not as sophisticated as ours. There were plagues, there were outbreaks, there were epidemics, there were pandemics. And I think we have been lulled into a comfort zone to believe that because of the technological sophistication we have today, that these sorts of insults we would be immune to. But we're not, and we see that we're not. So the point here for me is to remind you that you can be ready to be meeting these types of challenges as an educated technical person who's ready to contribute to society and use your science, technology, math, engineering, use your wits to be contributing to this type of challenge. So there are many. There's climate change, there's ocean change, and there is the current situation that we're dealing with in now. We will recover from this. We will come through this. But a question for you is, use your imagination. Would we engineer and engender the same economy that we had prior to this event, or there are things that we could do better? Can we work towards a circular economy, an economy that doesn't dispose of material so much as it reuses material? So achieving a balanced and sustainable economy, perhaps a blue economy with the ocean, is something that we can work towards. I'm betting that there are people who are part of the National Ocean Sciences Bowl finalists who are going to be the key makers of these solutions very near term. So I'm counting on you. Next slide, please. I wish we could have been in the same room because I would ask, how many people have seen a slide like this before? This is the classic photosynthesis slide that, or graphic image that's in textbooks all over the world. Next slide, please. How many people have seen this one? It's just as legitimate, and the oxygen production is equal from the terrestrial to the ocean genesis of oxygen. But we just don't think this way, typically, because we're not taught this way. But if we were to change things around and provide the proper kind of ocean education to people of all ages, I think we could have a very different outlook on the importance of oceans. Next slide, please. So the question I have for you is, what are our opportunities? And I'll translate that more directly. What are your opportunities? What might you choose to do with your career? Hopefully you're going to continue your education in a technical manner that gives you the opportunity to move and parlay, if you will, what you're gaining from your experience right now in this Science Bowl, and I'm sure you're participating in others. Well, let's move on to the next slide, please. In terms of NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the agency that I come from, and appreciate Admiral White's introduction for what NOAA does and how it does it, and also Dr. Graham made reference to our work. We work in many, many different areas. We work in climate, oceans, and weather. Of course, we have the National Weather Service in our agency, the National Marine Fisheries Service, the Ocean Service, a satellite service, and we have a fleet of 16 ships and aircraft as well. And the part of NOAA that I'm responsible for, the Ocean and Atmospheric Research Area. We're committed to pursuing what we consider to be the blue economy. We want to raise the ability for society to gain benefit through and from the oceans, but in a completely sustainable way. And we were looking to do this through increasing seafood production and competitiveness, maritime transportation efficiency, tourism. I think everyone loves to go to the beach. Admiral White talked about being a young fellow on the beach and enjoying himself in the surf. Ocean mapping, we're going to talk about that in just a little bit. And then, since most people live on the coast, and the Gulf Coast itself was insulted greatly by a series of hurricanes over time, Katrina, Rita, these are legendary storms that left an impact that was remarkable. We need to formulate a sustainable economy and a sustainable, resilient shoreline community. Next slide, please. So these are things that we're working on very hard. And if we can compare what NOAA's priorities are to, perhaps you know the OECD, it's an economic forum that's internationally based, and most of the progressive economies of the world are members of this group. But you could see where the economic future is. Fisheries will grow because the world will be hungry and needs to be fed by protein rearing fish. Tourism will grow, whether it's cruise ships, even after COVID-19, whether it's cruise ships or whether it's coastal residency, tourism will grow. Ocean observations are going to be very important because ocean forecasts, just like weather forecasts, will be needed in that point in time. Shipping will increase and offshore energy will increase as well. So with these forecasts, those are areas of job opportunity and technical opportunities that are slightly different and more compacted than they are today, but very similar to the direction that we're trying to drive in as we anticipate the future. Next slide, please. Observing the ocean is very much like observing the weather. And when we achieve the level of maritime transportation where ships are largely unmanned, when we have more offshore aquaculture installations, and when we have more offshore power and wind and solar stations, ocean forecasts are going to be more and more important than they are today. When we measure the ocean, we study climate through this because, as I mentioned earlier, the ocean is absorbing most of the heat that the Earth takes in. And we do this through a number of different devices. The technical specialties here include engineering, math is everywhere, biology, physics, physiology, and this particular device that we're putting over the side here is called an Argo float. There are 4,000 of these floats dispersed around the world. We maintain that distribution and supply of floats. They last anywhere from 4 to 6 years, and they sink down to 2,000 meters, come back to the surface, and with the antennas that you see on top, broadcast their scientifically derived information back to a national and international network. So we have 4,000 oceanographic platforms dispatched throughout the world today as I speak to you. This technology could never be matched by all the oceanographic research ships in the world. So we're moving from ship-based to autonomous-based monitoring and measuring of the world. That means a little bit more engineering, that means more math, that means something more than the scuba diving skills that I brought into my career. They will not be as heavily relied upon as will this type of technology. Next slide, please. Who doesn't want to explore the ocean? I was delighted in 2001 to be asked to start a program inside NOAA called Ocean Exploration, and we've been working at that ever since. And if you want to find an area of discovery, it's in the ocean. I saw on the internet an advertisement or an announcement of scientific discovery of a new species of salamander in a tropical rainforest. Goodness sakes, there are plenty of species that I'm confident we have not discovered yet in tropical rainforests. But I absolutely know that we are just peeling back the first layer of the biota, of the species, of the organisms that live in the ocean. We know so little about them. So here, this curious creature is what is called a Dumbo octopus. And he propels himself by those fleshy lobes that are just near his eye, instead of, as most octopuses do, by just pushing water through their body and undulating through the water with their tentacles. We don't know what he is. And I kind of like that. I kind of want to keep it that way, where we recognize that there are creatures in the ocean that we really know very little about. We're not taking the water away and you're looking at the undersea. But the reality is that much of this relief is artistic rendition rather than direct measurement. Next slide. If we were to look at the majority of the ocean's undersea measurements, they're made at a very crude level of resolution, about 2 to 3 kilometers of resolution. What you're looking at here is the United States Capitol. This is Washington, D.C., and the red square is around the Capitol building. If this were mapped instead of photogrammetry using photos for our mapping, if we were to look at the type of single beam bathymetry and the type of satellite bathymetry that we use to map the ocean, the next slide will show you what Washington, D.C. would look like. That. You wouldn't see the Washington Monument. You wouldn't see the Capitol building. There are a great many features that you wouldn't see. So next slide, please. When we look at mapping the ocean, we realize there's quite an area of the United States, that which appears in red, has not been mapped with the high resolution tools that we have today. We call them multi-beam echo sounders. You're probably very familiar with them and the technology. All these areas in red within those yellow perimeters are the areas of the United States exclusive economic zone that we haven't had a chance to map yet. We're committed now to map the US EEZ within the next 10 years. And we have a presidential memorandum that gives us the instruction to do so. So we will get that job done. Next slide, please. If we look at some of the partnerships that are around, we have seen people of private wealth join in the ocean exploration and ocean science world. We're delighted that we have the likes of OceanX with Mr. Ray Dalio, Ocean Infinity, a very imaginative company that uses new technology to map the ocean. We have people like the Viking Cruise Lines that have linked up with us in order to do adventure tourism, but also science at the same time. We have a very interesting project in the upper left corner called Seabed 2030. Maybe you'll be working on this in the few years, but Seabed 2030 is a project to map not just the United States exclusive economic zone, but the world's ocean. Next slide, please. Something that I'm very excited about and I'm very involved with is developing the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. So I mentioned earlier developing a circular economy, one that doesn't waste but utilizes the blue economy, the ocean-based economy. That really is the sustainable development of the ocean. So we're talking about the same thing here domestically in the United States as we are throughout all of the nations of the United Nations. So what we have proposed to do for a UN Decade of Ocean Science is to focus on at least these areas that appear before you. I've shown you how we don't really have a good map of the undersea. We need to build one. We need better ocean observations in all the major ocean basins. These would involve physical, chemical, and biological measurements, which means we need physicists, engineers, biologists, chemists. We need to be conducting an inventory of the ecosystem with far greater measurement than we can do today. We're using studies like genetics and omics in order to make those determinations. By the time you high school seniors graduate from college, this will be a regularly practiced routine measurement that will replace the way that we're measuring the biological components of the ocean today, from bacteria to whales, and even including the bacteria that's in the stomach of the whale. We can measure it all by sampling the ocean. We need better data delivery and information portals. We're going to build a global portal for oceanographic information, establishing a multi-hazard warning system. We now have tropical cyclone or hurricane warnings. We need to improve the skill in those warnings, but we also need to make sure that countries that don't have the same level of economic gain as we do have access to these very same things. And then, of course, we want to have better models of the Earth and the atmosphere, basically integrated ocean and atmospheric models. And then we also need capacity development, so countries that don't have the capability to deliver these warnings to their people or this information to their people can be provided to them. This decade will belong to you. We're creating it now. I'm part of a small team of 20 people around the globe that are planning this UN Decade. And we have an implementation plan that's being reviewed by the UN now. You're going to inherit this, and I hope some of you are taking my job and will be in a position in order to do this. Next slide, please. We're going to go a layer deeper just very quickly to show you the 6 major themes that we hope to achieve. We all want a clean ocean. We all want a healthy ocean that is resilient to the insults, whether it's an oil spill or whether it's a severe storm. In terms of a predicted ocean, this means that we humans have the ability to predict the facets of the ocean as it develops over time. Next slide, please. We're not going to make the ocean safe. It's always going to be a somewhat challenging place. You might even consider part of it a dangerous place, but we want the people to be safe in their interactions with the ocean. And we also, of course, want sustainable production from the ocean so we can feed people. And transparent and accessible means that those economies, those people, those folks that come from countries that don't have an economy like ours, have the access to the information that they need in order to manage their communities and their people well. Next slide. So as we look for the future here, we have a number of activities that are targeting the young people, you folks. And our effort in youth is sustained by the National Ocean Sciences Bowl. So once again, congratulations to the organizers, the Consortium for Ocean Leadership, and the people who have been at this for so long and helping to support this. We have a number of activities for youth, and I would encourage you to get involved with them. Now, we unfortunately had to postpone, not cancel, but postpone the National Marine Educators Association meeting. But each of these other meetings we're very hopeful will continue. And I promise you, there is a youth group in the UN Decade of Ocean Science. We're labeling it the Early Career Professionals Group, but there's room for everyone, and I encourage you to get involved with this. And now on this next slide, please. You're going to come to find shortly in the course of your activity during this session of the Ocean Sciences Bowl, a challenge that relates to the UN Decade of Ocean Science and invites your imagination in to contribute ideas to the success of this endeavor, which is the Draw Your Decade activity. You'll get more details on this. I would love to participate in this. This looks like a whole lot of fun. It'll be Friday on April 24th, and I hope you're looking forward to that. So as I conclude these remarks, I just want to circle back. A kid from New Jersey who believed that the best I could probably do in life is maybe learn how to scuba dive, but maybe get a job as a deckhand on an oceanographic research ship. And I've wound up today representing the United States at UN bodies for ocean science, negotiating with other countries for scientific advancement and achievement, and working in an agency that I love and I've been with since 1981, but in a manner that I never thought I would as well achieve when I entered NOAA as an ensign on my first ship. Don't be bound by any limits that you think people are putting on you. For you young ladies that are out there, I promise you that every woman who has achieved, Edie Witter and others, who have achieved scientific excellence and expertise, they were told by a male-dominated community, this is not for you. Well, it is for you. And young men, everyone, the sciences are a rich body of exploration, intellectually and physically. There are no limits to what you can achieve. And if you can see anyone, whether it's from the highest levels of government or the highest levels of scientific achievement, if you can see anyone working in a domain and working in a field that excites you, do not think for a minute that you cannot be capable to compete in that domain as well. If you want it, go after it and go get it. One last piece of advice. There are many temptations in life, and one of them might be expensive cars or fancy clothes, the likes. Let not money be your motivator. Let your satisfaction and your heart be what sustains you. Find something you enjoy doing, do that for the rest of your life, and you'll wind up being remarkably successful and very happy as an individual. Do good things. Congratulations to all the competitors and to all the teams here in the finals. I know you're all going to come away from this experience with a great new refreshed attitude, and you'll help us solve the next challenge. Keep thinking, what's next? You'll be part of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Craig. Again, round of virtual applause. I know you're used to getting standing ovations. I've given you some before, but really inspirational remarks. Thank you so much. All right, now for the audience, for the competitors, others, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, so please type in your questions. I know you have questions because I've seen some really interesting questions and comments in the chat room associated, so please start typing a few of them. So, Craig, while we're waiting for, I'm sure, the not so shy students to type a few questions into the box there, a couple that I have is so the UN Decade is going to kick off in January of next year, as you mentioned, in the midst of a sort of a global sort of focus around the crisis and vaccines and pandemics. Are you and the other folks leading the UN Decade effort thinking about how you might spearhead, sort of an effort to link the ocean science to human health, which we all know is so important, but much of the world doesn't quite understand it as well as we think they should, I guess. So any thoughts on that? Thanks.
Well, thank you, John. Very much so. And as we look at the categorization of areas of inquiry that I mentioned, the healthy ocean, resilient ocean, and the like, I think the link of human health and oceans is one that is documented in the science, and it is apparent. But further to that, the Ocean Decade gives us an opportunity to really highlight that, because we will be recovering from this episode. It will not be far in the distant memory of people. Folks, we will recover from this. We will rebound from this. We will be well. It's going to take science to close the gap, produce vaccines, and get us to a better point where we're resistant to this bug. And then perhaps along comes the next bug. It will happen. But as long as we keep science in mind and we can tie the ocean advancements to this, I think there's a linkage. There's another linkage as well, John. You know this very well, and Monty as well. Medicines from the sea are in that ocean, and we've just scratched the surface at what these medicines are. Because if you think about evolution of organisms and early processes in early life, they are resident inside of our cells. And when we come to understand the physiology of some of these more primitive cells, we often find solutions to disease or to malmanipulations of our own bodies. And we have found solutions there. So the linkage, I think, will be profound. And this is a very interesting time as we will be recovering from the COVID-19 episode, and we'll be moving forward and advancing ocean science at the same time recognizing the advantages to human health.
Great, thank you. Sort of given that in the UN Decade, one question from Ella Crotty is so how much do you think undergraduate students will be involved in the research aspect of the UN Decade, or other aspects, internships, labs, or things around the UN Decade?
I have great hope and anticipation for the decade that if I were to look at a measure today, just ask 25 people on the street what they know of and think of the importance of ocean science, I would probably get a rather low number for people to say, yeah, I recognize it's important and I think we need to be engaged in this. I would say during the course of the decade, we're going to raise visibility throughout the world in the public's mind of why the oceans are important. That 50% of the air that we get from the ocean, as opposed to from trees, grass, and forests, from photosynthesis, it's photosynthesis, but it's in the oceans. Most people don't know that. As we use this decade, and we plan to, as a vehicle to communicate to the public the excitement and the discovery of oceans, but why oceans count, why the food that we get from the ocean, the oxygen we get from the ocean, the climate moderation that we get from the ocean that helps us live here on dry land, I think the public will be much more scientifically literate. So where's the opportunity for undergraduates? As you go through your courses, I think the academic programs that are more interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary, transdisciplinary, I think that's going to be a major component of the opportunity the decade brings, to be encouraging academic institutions to be bridging disciplines and looking at the importance of ocean and climate. Undergraduates increasingly are more skillful than they were in my day in order to be contributing to the science that we're going to be taking up, either by exploring or monitoring or measuring. And in many cases now, I look back almost with a humorous recollection. When I was an undergraduate, I sailed on my first NOAA ship when I was a junior in college. I had a very gifted mentor, a dear lady named Dr. Carol Litchfield, and she invited me out on NOAA cruises on her project and in her lab, and we were studying marine microbiology. Basically, I just wanted to keep my samples in line, my test tubes well organized, collect the samples, and create some streaked agar plates of microbes. Today, it's omics and eDNA, and undergraduates can do much more than just have to mind their small sample collection. Undergraduates can even be planning the sampling regime. So the opportunities are huge. Stay with it. You'll find that opportunity, and volunteer as much as you can.
Very good advice, Craig. Thanks. So a lot of comments on the chat about the things in the background of your room, your office, your museum there. A lot of talk about the bottles. A question is, of all those dozens of bottles on the shelves up there, is there one of them, or which one of them has the most interesting or incredibly interesting story behind it?
It's not, well, to me, the one that I would pick up is, maybe I can go pick it up. Excuse me. Let me see how I could do this. I hope this turns out well. Let's see how this goes. All right, so we're going on a tour, and we're going to walk on over here, and I'm going to point out a few things. I'm sorry it's a little fuzzy because it's not very bright over here, but this is an inkwell. And this came from the Virgin Islands, and all I ever saw this inkwell underneath the ship that I was the executive officer on was just this tiny little top, and it looked like a wormhole. And I took my hand up and I fanned the sand, and then I saw that it just got to be a little bit more developed, and then when I picked it up, I realized that it was an inkwell, and it's rather old. And when I went to the authorities and showed them what I had found, because I was responsible and I came from a federal ship, the local harbor master and the historian in the community there said, well, congratulations, you found an inkwell. Have at it. So there are many other things that I have found that I have turned over to state and other archaeologists and worked on other projects with them. But some of these were a joy. I'll show you another fun one. This old jug, this is a rather old jug. This and this bottle were part of basically what was a dump back in probably the early to mid 1700s in Cape Cod Bay. And we were moving an anchor that was part of a scientific installation. And I saw these bottles on the bottom. We called the state archaeologist. The archaeologist came over, and basically we hauled in probably about a garbage barrel, just a kind of a homeowner's garbage barrel size of bottles out of there, laid them all out on the pier. And the archaeologist from Massachusetts said, okay, we'll take these 3 and those 4 and the rest you have. But I would encourage you that if you do find anything of submerged history, that you try to be responsible and consult the authorities that are for all of society. And we wind up putting more in a museum than we wind up putting in our basement. But this has been much of my life. Since I started diving at 14. By the time I was 15, I was diving on shipwrecks off of New Jersey and eventually all over the world.
Thanks, Greg. Great stories to share and great advice on sort of those who want to go and explore and find things, and that there are ways to be responsible and follow the rules and still be able to bring back some treasures. Thank you for that. Somewhat a related question from Harish Balasubramanian. I know I mispronounced that badly. Is sort of what measures do you think normal people can take to make sure they do not harm oceanic ecosystems and actually help those ecosystems? Now, I know that's changed a lot since I started diving back in the mid-70s, but just in terms of normal people not harming ecosystem, I think it's a crucial part of our future.
I appreciate the question. It shows you care. I think we all care. And if you can inspire others to care, that would be very important. Probably the easiest thing that we can do is mind our use of resources. And the most prolific resource that we have available to us is plastic. My glasses, straws, any bit or piece of plastic. We're consuming nominal products packaged in plastic or delivered to us in plastic and then we discard the plastic. If we could get away from that, we could be doing a lot of good for the oceans, because by the time plastic reaches the sea, it breaks down into microplastics. They get consumed by microorganisms or even larger organisms, fish, turtles, any of the animals that we see in the ocean, we're finding plastic in. In fact, we humans are an animal, and you can find plastics in our body because they are ubiquitous and we're consuming it unwittingly. So I think to be conscientious, you want to be an ocean steward, you want to be a positive influence, start reducing the consumption of plastic in your lifestyle and think about that circular economy where you don't need it. You don't need to be incorporating plastic products into your life.
Plastics has been one of the biggest changes in the conservation space in the last 2 or 3 years. I've been really impressed of how really the world population, but especially the population of the U.S., have really changed their views on plastics. One reason that's happened, I believe, is the impact of social media. And there's a question from Ireland Neville, and how do you think social media will affect ocean conservation? And will social media be the most important platform for ocean conservation, and how?
Oh, I agree. I agree. Social media is the key. When I was a small guy, there was a television commercial that was sponsored by just a goodwill outlook to stop pollution. And there was a picture of a Native American in traditional dress. And this person who represents the culture that really is the spirit, the heart, and those who owned America that we know today. The Native American had tears running down his face because he could see the litter on the side of the road. And that was, to me, the beginning of a social media campaign that today is so much more ubiquitous and cosmopolitan, in that everyone has a phone, everyone has a cell phone, everyone can gather and collect medium, and people can project medium. I think the danger is in making sure that what you're looking at, you can verify as truthful. I think that's a challenge we have with social media. But when you start looking at the ability to make and convey a message, and every high school student could do it brilliantly, you're going to have an influence. And the more we put out messages and the more we transfer that information to each other with the convenience of social media, I think we're going to see very positive news and inspirations happen and get spread so much more quickly than if it was just limited to broadcast television or print media. So the conveniences that we have to exchange information today are wonderful. And I think we each have the responsibility to make sure that what we're reading and assimilating is truthful, and that the veracity can be found in it. But using social media is going to be a fantastic way for us to communicate to the public, to the world, how important good conservation and oceans are.
Great. I cannot agree more. Okay, we got time for 2 more questions. The first one, a lot of people want to hear a little bit more about your adventure with the wreck of the Titanic, of course. So could you talk a little bit more about that, your experience with it, so
Sure.
how that went, just a couple of minutes. Thanks.
Sure, I'll be very quick. When the Titanic was discovered by Dr. Ballard, whom we know quite well, Dr. Robert Ballard, who's up in University of Rhode Island and also with Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, Dr. Ballard came back with the location of the Titanic and tried to protect it. Very soon thereafter, the Titanic was the subject, without Dr. Ballard's ability to stop it, the Titanic was then the subject of salvage, and there were artifacts that were recovered from the Titanic. I have artifacts back here, but I assure you they are only replicas. We picked nothing up from the Titanic at all. We didn't touch the wreck. We observed it only. But the Congress, right after the discovery, created a law that asked the United States government to develop a treaty to protect the Titanic as a maritime memorial. So we had a task. We had to, number one, figure out exactly how do you construct an international maritime memorial, because that had never been done before. And the other aspect was we needed to really get a good site map and understand how the site was laid out on the bottom and what was important about it, and where and what to protect. So we made a series of dives, both with manned submersibles, which was just a marvelous experience for me to be inside of that submersible diving and looking right outside that porthole at the world's most famous shipwreck. And then we also made a series of remotely operated vehicle dives. The difference is inside a 7-foot diameter sphere where you and 2 other people are in for a ride of anywhere from 14 to 18 hours each. It's pretty cold inside there too, because there's no heat and the ocean bottom is just about a ½ degree above zero. So it's pretty chilly in there. So you're down there in this very unique environment, looking out a porthole at an amazing sight. And I'll juxtapose that with if I remember correctly, we had about 83, 82 hours of bottom time on one dive with a remotely operated vehicle on the Titanic. So as technology has progressed from having to put man in the sea, God bless, it's a great adventure. And when that hatch pops, you feel like $1 million when you come up out of the submersible. But from a scientific productivity measure, being able to put the robotic device down there, and we stay up on deck, enjoying our soft drinks and popcorn as we're doing our work, and not having the inconvenience of being stuck in this tiny frozen sphere, it's a big difference, and it's a much different world. But it was absolutely exciting for me. I also did some work as a young fellow investigating, if you're familiar with the Titanic story, the proximity of the Titanic and the ship that was the SS Californian. And the claim at the time in 1912 was that the Californian and the Titanic were between 5 and 8 miles distant. And why didn't the Californian come and rescue the Titanic passengers as the Titanic sunk? I didn't buy the story. I didn't believe the story. Myself and another fellow named David Eno, we conducted some investigations and we recalculated the proximity of the vessels. We concluded that the vessels were about 20 miles apart, and that there was a third vessel in between the two, seen by the Titanic survivors. And the British government investigated about 2 years after our work, which I'm glad we published, and they came to the same conclusion that we did, was that the Californian and the Titanic were separated by about 18 to 20 miles. And the most gratifying phone call that I ever did receive, along with Mr. Eno, was the son of the captain of the Californian, who thanked us for trying to clear in history the dignity of his father's name, his father having long passed on prior to that.
So Craig, so given your work, are you going to get a ride on the Titanic too?
Well, I don't know, John, that might be anticlimactic, but I would love to see it when it's finished. And I think there are a great many challenges waiting for every one of us. But the one that I want to post for all the young people that are part of the Ocean Sciences Bowl is to go find your challenge, follow your song, follow your heart, find that fuel that fires you up and really motivates you. Maybe it's electronics, computer engineering, software development. Maybe it's putting flippers on and going into the sea and looking about. Find what motivates you and go make that your career. That's
great advice. And since you brought up song, there was one more question I had to ask, since I brought it up, of you being a drummer. Somebody wants to know, what's your favorite genre? And I would say, if you could go one further, so tell us what one of your favorite drummers is, who that might be, and maybe a favorite band.
Okay, I'll make that easy then. My genres, I've played everything from big band music all the way up to, I kind of stop at I'm through indie and I'm in there, but not much on rap, although the groove of rap is just absolutely motivating. But I really have a hard time rhyming anything, so I stay away from that sort of thing. But two drummers that I think are just absolutely amazing, Carter Buford from the Dave Matthews Band, and I'm going to swing all the way over to Buddy Rich, who really defined drumming with finesse and movement that's so fluid that he's just amazing to watch. I enjoy playing blues. I've been in a blues band for better part of 25 years. Something about that horn section and a good guitar really gets me motivated, but doesn't match the thrill I get from jumping in the ocean and diving on a new reef or a new shipwreck.
All right, Craig, again, thanks to you and Amani for your inspirational remarks. Certainly with your leadership of YouTube, gents, again, I'm very optimistic about the future. I know that the education of ocean scientists and scientists writ large and those careers that follow on are in very good hands with leaders like you, and we have so many around our country and around the world. So thank you for being part of our National Ocean Sciences Bowl. Thank you for being with us tonight. Very, very well done.
Thank you and good night. Monty, thank you.
So normally at this point, I provide advice that's normally not followed, which is to tell all the students. They should get back to their hotel rooms and get a good night's sleep. But since you don't have to go back to your rooms now, maybe you'll be doing some online studying with each other or something like that. But it's going to be interesting. I wish you again all the best in the coming days. And I know you don't need luck because you're very well accomplished, but I just wish you the best of success going forward. I would also just like to, there's a couple of interesting stories, final ones. Noticed that the Westwood Marine and Oceanic Academy, or MOAA, they've been together at MOAA for 4 years, studying together, partnering with Harbor Ranch Institution in Florida. And this was their first trip to nationals. So sorry that for you and many more that are with us tonight, that your first trip is a virtual one, but I know it's going to be meaningful as well. So thank you for that. And just one more I had, which was from Lexington High School. It says, although the members of Lexington NOSB have studied the oceans intensely, they have never actually seen a real ocean or what it contains. So we'd love to have shown you that in the Gulf of Mexico, but hopefully you'll get a chance to do that in many oceans around the world in your future. So it's great to have you here as well, again, in the virtual ocean. And with that, I just want to offer some thanks. First of all, again, to all of our students and competitors, coaches, thank you very much. To all of the regional coordinators, to all the volunteers. We have just about as many volunteers every year as we do competitors, and the volunteers actually make up the biggest sponsorship that we have, people giving of their time. If you were to pay them in minimum wage, it would basically, that would be more money than any of the agencies or sponsors actually provide. So thank your volunteers locally. Thank all of our volunteers. Thanks you, Aaron, and the University of Southern Miss. But mostly, I just want to say thank you to the National Ocean Sciences Bowl staff at COL here in DC, or in virtual DC right now. It was only 6 weeks ago when we started to get some idea that we might not be able to do this thing as we normally had. And we sat around a table and said, virtual? Oh, that's too hard. We could never do that. But I looked at the fire in the eyes of Amanda and Melissa and the rest of the NOSB team at COL. They talked to the RCs. They knew what was out there, and we've been able to pull this off. I know there's going to be a couple, of speed bumps along the way, but I know it's going to be a highway of enthusiastic, scientific fun and learning. So thank you to the staff of COL. Thank you to everyone who's involved in the National Ocean Sciences Bowl. This is my highlight every year. As you went around DC and we deal with the governments and the frustrations and bureaucracies, every year when this event happens, it's what inspires me for the following years and years to come. And I think if it hadn't been for this, I probably wouldn't be doing the job I'm doing now. So thank you for making a real difference in our oceans today and certainly in the future. And good luck to all of you as you compete, and good luck in the many, many days of ocean science in all of our futures. Have a very good night.